Welcome back to the Sustainable Creator. This week, we're trying something new and interesting. If you know us at all, we like to bring up things that we're thinking about, learning about all the time. And so we're basically structuring this around the idea of these are the things that are living rent-free in our brain, and we each brought three-ish things that we haven't told each other about. And so we're going to spend the next however long this is telling each other cool things we're thinking about this week or that have been stuck in our brains.
The problem is we're both overachievers, so there's more than three. I think.
Yes. And we will go on tangents.
So, enjoy.
Would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I can. I feel like our lists are going to be very different, which that's kind of the point. So, I guess I'll just kick us off. I have been thinking a lot about I want to create a wealthy wall in our house. So there's a mini house project that I have in mind. There's a wall beside where my desk lives in our house that I want to decorate, and I'm going to call it my wealthy wall, where I'm going to put up things that represent the wealthy life that I want to live. And this is something that we talk about with our coaching clients a lot. One of the first questions that we ask them is, what does your wealthy life look like? And we remind them that wealth is not necessarily constrained to numbers monetarily wise. Wealth could be that you want to clock off in the middle of the afternoon to go sit at a coffee shop and have a dreaming date, or you want to be able to have a long weekend once a month, not dependent on a holiday or whatever. Like, wealth is more about the life that you are living. And then you can work backwards on what's the money you need to make to support that wealthy life for you.
I think it's interesting. Like, one of the things on this note that we've talked about a lot recently is rich is dollars in a bank account, wealthy is the ability to do.
Yeah. So going back to this wealthy wall that I would like to design, I guess, for lack of a better word, in our office, my office space-ish corner. I want it to be a gallery wall of sorts of different pictures or art or things that represent the wealthy life that we are either already living or that I want to experience for ourselves. And so it's these reminders of everything that we are building and have built. Because another thing that I encourage our coaching clients on quite often is you need to collect evidence for yourself of what you are capable of doing. Money is always like a pretty big topic in some capacity. And anytime you start to stretch yourself in business or in life, you start to counter a lot of emotions that come with those stretch seasons. And for instance, a lot of clients, when they know that it's time to raise their prices, that can come with a lot of emotions, even if you know it's the right decision to make, depending on your background, your beliefs, whatever, all that jazz, right? And so one of the biggest things that I will tell clients is, you've shown yourself that you can do this. You have evidence. Go ahead and grab some of that evidence, whether it's a screenshot of your highest paycheck that you've had, your highest cash month, maybe something that you recently paid off that you're super, proud of, whatever it is. Like, get a screenshot, print it out, and frame it and put it on your desk or somewhere that you can see it to remind you of what you're capable of. So that's another example of wealthy wall. So I'm excited for that. That's living rent free in my mind right now because I'm thinking about what I want it to look like, what I want to go on there. And so I'm just mentally designing it right now.
I think this is really interesting from the perspective of, like, we talk about anchors a lot and the idea of, like, how do you keep yourself from straying too far? And oftentimes, like, dreaming, like, we have both run into this, like, we write it in a document or a journal and we don't see it ever again. And so, like, you actually have to go and look for it. Whereas, like, if it's visually in your space and you see it every day, or if it's on your lock screen, like, that's such a fun anchor to, oh, this is actually what I'm doing this for.
Right.
And if I'm straying too far, it's like, oh, I'm feeling distance from the anchor that I have in my visual space, which is really interesting.
Yeah, visual cues. That's another good phrase for it. Okay, what's on your list?
So I think the first one on my list is something that I actually said on a coaching call this week, and I cannot stop thinking about the example. And we were having a conversation about having a process or what you're doing. And the way I reframed it for our coaching client was, in reality, stories are effectively you telling someone what your process was. And the thing that is rent free in my brain is if we look back before there was like a printing press or standard, like everybody knew how to write a lot, like the way that knowledge was transferred was through like telling people stories. And that was effectively telling people processes that as you grow up, you learn from those stories. And it's interesting now that like it's been traditionalized that like process has to be like a 1, 2, 3, 4 exactly step by step process. Whereas oftentimes like the really helpful things is like telling people a story of like, this is how it has been done, or this is how I've seen it done, or this is how I did it. And as I'm thinking about being more of an expert, I'm now reflecting on if stories are a version of telling people processes, how do I start telling more of my own stories? Because I have a storied past. Like I went to school and learned some things. I worked in manufacturing, which I just don't really talk about at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But like I learned a lot about change management because I went through a big implementation, and there was so many little like nuggets that I pull on now that I've standardized into a process. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily tell the story of how I learned that potentially that could relate to people more than I think of.
How would someone like put that into action if they're resonating with that redefinition of what a process can look like?
So like I think for me a version of like telling a story is when I was in grad school, I was a graduate assistant. That one of the things that I did was interviewing people coming into school. And so I spent time just reviewing resumes, and part of this was I looked at a lot of like how did people tell their stories in a way that was like these are the things that I did. And then I would sit in an interview and interview them of like how did your past history set you up for this. And the people that, even if it's not a metric or something specific, it was this was the thing that happened, and then this happened, and that happened, and this is what I learned. And being able to just like show it through like a chain of events was I can now replicate this process as I'm entering a top tier grad school program, and I'm of the caliber that deserves to be here. And that's something that you can think about of what are the stories that you hear yourself telling people, and how do you maybe put it into like a couple phases of that story, or like give a summary at the end of A, B, C, D, E was the steps that I went through in this story, so that you can now start simplifying it down so you can tell it long form or short form as a process.
That's interesting. That actually kind of segues nicely into my next point.
Okay.
So the next thing on my list is a story. It's about Steve Martin. I'm reading the book Hidden Potential by Adam Grant right now. And I like Adam Grant a lot because he's an organizational psychologist, behavior psychologist, organizational psychologist. So in his books, he shares a lot of stories that are very research backed and his findings from them. And so it's so interesting to read his books. This book, before I go into the particular story, like I mentioned, it's called Hidden Potential, and it's how achieving greater things, oftentimes it takes character and trying things over and over again, not necessarily being the smartest person in the room. And so he gives a lot of examples in the book about how people in either situations or circumstances or positions that were like not necessarily against them, but didn't exactly set them up for what most people would think success, how they still achieved great things. And where I'm at in the book right now, he's talking about the art of just showing up. You know, a lot of times we want to be able to just master a new skill right away by learning about it, when actually it requires doing and practicing over and over. So where the story comes in about Steve Martin is Steve Martin, he started doing stand-up comedy in 1960s, and he bombed. He was so bad at it. Like he was so bad. He would have these jokes that he would try to say on stage, and it would just be crickets for 5 minutes, followed by crickets for another 5 minutes. And that would just repeat. And at one time he even had somebody like threw a bottle of red wine at him on stage. So can't imagine what a mess that would have been to clean up. But he was just like notoriously bad at it. And at the time he was studying what other people were doing and trying to learn from their techniques, how they showed up, how they packaged thoughts, yada, yada. And it still wasn't working for him. And the thing that made the switch for him is he started writing. And I don't remember what prompted him to start doing this. I think someone may have recommended that he do it, but he started writing down his jokes or just like processes, I guess, just things. But the funny thing is he procrastinated on writing for a really long time before he finally committed to it. And it was when he started to write that he started to encapsulate his thoughts and bring more structure to his jokes. So it was a lot less context and, you know, sharing a long thought just to get to the punchline, and a lot more packaged thought that had a stronger delivery. And I thought that was really interesting because I am a big journaler. I love writing, and I've been thinking about writing even more just as a creative outlet and starting to filter through some of my thoughts. And that felt like a supporting piece of evidence on how valuable it can be.
I think it's interesting. I think it was like 2 weeks ago I sent you a thing of like where like writing is slowly becoming a differentiator in a way that it wasn't before. And
Right.
I think the parallel that I think of for a long time is my mom's in higher education. And I remember a couple of years ago talking to her of like, for a long time in elementary school, they had to have a typing class where kids had to learn to type because technology was so new. And like, I remember learning to type in elementary school. And then at some point in like the teens, like it inflected of kids were coming to school knowing how to type because they already had devices. They were digital native. But now we were having to teach kids how to social because up until that point, they were doing everything online now. And so they understood all of the technology, and it was more important to teach social skills. And I think it's almost interesting, like looking at right now, I think writing might be going through one of those because for a long time it was either you wrote it or you paid a copywriter. And now like AI just makes everybody able to write copy. But the thought process of doing writing is so valuable because exactly like you're talking, it forces you to structure it. And that is now becoming less common because it's a waste of time, quote unquote, for a lot of people. Whereas like the value as a thought leader is refined through the process and the drudgery of writing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. Writing has always been a really helpful way for me to process things that are happening in my brain, whether I am fully conscious of them or not, you know, subconscious working. So it is very, very useful. And I know there's a lot of different studies that support the power of writing, you know, with what you learn and remember and goals happening and all of that stuff too. So that's interesting. Okay. What was next on your list?
Next on my list, if you've been around, you're listening to this, you know, we're experimenting with a podcast. I'm thinking about learning with the podcast. And one of the things that I have been paying attention to as like a resource is I've been listening to a podcast called Podcasting Business School. And this week he put up an episode around his content flywheel, which I love a good sales funnel or marketing funnel. And I thought it was really interesting how he broke down for himself, like very like a high volume of output with a very low volume of effort, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is you're either using AI or repurposing. So what does that mean in this case?
So for him, he's like, I don't use AI.
Okay.
And a lot of it is repurposing. So he starts with the long form. And we've talked about this a decent amount of like start long form, chop it down. But the way that he thinks about his process is he starts long form on the podcast. He records something. And then the thing that he does differently than a lot of people is he does not send an email about that episode the same week it goes up. He has enough episodes at this point that he delays by about 8 weeks. And then he sends an email on the same topic. And so it feels like for people, they're getting 2 separate pieces of long form from him per week.
Interesting.
But by distancing it, he's getting engagement on both things that hit people every week. So it starts podcast, pause, delay for a while. Then that same piece of content goes in the email like 8 to 12 weeks later. And then every episode goes into his, like he has a document where he chops it up into 8 to 10 threads, I think, from
Mhm.
every podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But for every podcast, he only puts up one thread per week. So he
Okay.
does 8 to 10 threads posts over like 2 to 3 months from the same episode. And so like he chops this up into all of the like
Okay.
standout pieces of content,
Uh-huh.
and then he schedules them out. And I think you can directly schedule threads inside of Threads.
Yes,
And so
you can.
he's taking, I record this once, and now this is the flywheel over like 2 to 3 months. Like the startup, when you're first doing it, it's a lot of effort. But in steady state, it's actually not that much effort as a
Mhm.
consistent process for sales and marketing. And like that's his only channels that I understand. It's podcast, email, Threads.
When he sends that email 8 weeks later, is he pointing people to the podcast to listen more, or is it purely a standalone email?
To my understanding, it's purely standalone.
So it's pretend like the podcast episode doesn't even exist. We're sending the same material or a spinoff of it.
Yeah. And like he self-writes the emails like with his own brain, but it's basically the same like prep material that he
Mhm.
used for the podcast and the email. So like all of the things are there. And like I think he made the comment of like it's 8 or 12 weeks later that
Mhm.
there is some new thoughts that he has on topics. And so like he'll sprinkle those in,
Yeah.
but he basically did all of the prep work. And so it's just like put it on paper, ready to send.
Do you know if for the threads, if he is, I assume he is doing other threads, non-podcast related, if it's one a week, or did he mention that? I could
I
probably go find out myself.
believe if you're listening to this, I am going to link the episode in the show notes down below if you want to go and listen to that, if you care about podcasts. My understanding is he also does other ones. So like for when I think he said when a podcast goes up, he does somewhere between like 3 and 8 pieces of content specific to the episodes going up live that week.
That's
But
interesting.
then like the repurposing, I think he does the repurposing to threads from the email that he writes.
Yeah.
So he's writing the email, he already has it in text that like is his brain thoughts, and then those schedule out after that.
This is fascinating. I mean, that's something that we could definitely experiment with. Are you thinking about experimenting with that?
I don't know. Like we've gone back and forth on threads a lot.
Oh, I'm
And
talking, sorry, the email specifically. I should have clarified. My brain is moving too fast.
I am open to experimenting on
Yeah.
email, and I was debating about writing our email for this week based on if I pull back 2 months, this would be something in May, which
It's fascinating.
I might be considering trying, but we're
That's
already doing email experiments, so I don't know if we
interesting.
want to do more email experiments.
Well, I mean, if we're going to experiment with, I don't see why not. Yeah, I don't see why not.
So the
That's
other email
interesting.
experiments I'm referring to is on the Tuesday episode, we interviewed Jordan, which gave us a ton of email thoughts. So if you haven't listened to that one, I would go back and listen to that
Mhm.
because it was a fantastic interview.
Yeah, it was very, very good. Okay.
What's your next one?
There's a couple I could choose from, and they all feel very like philosophical.
Oh, love a good philosophical.
Okay. I think there's we were talking about this a little bit last night. Just how I made the comment to you how it feels like we are growing so fast right now in the sense of our habits, our mindset, the way we show up, what we are iterating on in business. Like even the podcast is such a good example of this. You know, like we are refining and growing constantly. So I don't mean growth in the standard sense that people think about growth in metrics and all that. Like that's awesome too, but I'm talking about more growth as a whole, which is a very fascinating thing to observe for myself, a bit of an out-of-body experience, if you will. And that's translating into a lot of things, which I guess this kind of ties into one of the other things I had on my list was I heard a quote in Sam Vanderwielen's podcast yesterday. She was doing she's doing a summer Substack series on her podcast where she's reading her Substacks, which that's a very fun marketing idea in my opinion. But the first one that she shared was about going more offline. And she shared this quote that we will be the first generation to die with more memories of other people's lives than our own. And that really like hit for me because we've talked a lot about how there's just so much information online about other people, and parasocial relationships are such a big thing. And this ties into the growth piece for me, because one area that I'm growing is how do I go more offline, more intentionally, and more intentionally show up online. So what does, do each of those areas look like in this season of life? And that feels like a pretty big area of growth for me too, because yeah.
I think the other interesting thing that like I have started noticing is like we grow fastest when we consume the least.
Yeah.
And like we have now both like referenced podcasts or long form things that we are learning from in this episode. And I think that it's interesting, like looking at the correlation of like the amount of short form or algorithmic content we consume is almost directly correlated to our pace of growth.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. I feel like it's a very like broad topic. Growth can look like a lot of different things. But it is interesting to see all the ways that we are just growing as humans and individuals right now, which is very fun. Okay. What's last on your list?
So I think the last one on my list is honestly a question that you asked in a podcast interview we did this week. It's going to go up next week. It's with Mel. Fantastic episode. You asked a question of like, are you focusing on how much a sale is or the customer lifetime value? And this is a conversation that I feel like we have been having a lot more recently. And as we are choosing the type of business we want to be when we grow up, we're starting to switch to that metric a lot more. And for those of you that don't know, a customer lifetime value generally is like, how much is this person going to buy things from you over their lifetime? And it's kind of a deceiving metric because most people in corporate use that as like a 2 or a 3 year time frame. Like it's not forever because that's just difficult to quantify. But when you think about like in previous versions of this business, we actually had our best clients were the ones that would purchase from us more than once. And like we didn't necessarily talk about it as customer lifetime value. But as we're starting to think about like, how do you build more of an ecosystem? How do we have more touch points with people and serve them at multiple points along their journey? It now makes more sense to like have like lower ticket things because we know that they're going to roll into higher ticket or multiple low ticket things, which is a really interesting way of, we're not necessarily saying that we're going to make less money. We're partially just thinking about how do we work with the same people multiple times and make it intuitive to do that.
Right. I think it's actually the opposite. Like it gives you opportunity to make even more money.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's really interesting to me is for a lot of service providers, that's a difficult concept to wrap your head around because it's, I want to maximize this sale and then they offboard and I might not ever work with them again. And so how do we as coaches start bringing that into the conversation? Like we talk about recurring revenue an awful lot and ecosystems, and how do we get better at talking about like, what is the next thing that you're just teeing up for your clients instead of offboarding them? Or how do they have a recurring something in the future so that we are helping service providers to actually increase their customer lifetime value, but also like the impact that they're having on their clients. It's not just like money grab. It's, I want to provide a ton of value that's also justifies those multiple purchases.
So what you're saying is like, how do we start helping other business owners expand their customer lifetime value?
Yeah. And like,
got it.
How do we bring that a lot more front and center into some conversations that we're having? Because those are some of the most interesting conversations that we're having right now.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I like it.
Okay, you said you had a bonus thing.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I wrote down honorable mentions, but it's basically, I mean, if we're truly talking about what's living rent free in my mind right now, is the fact that I want to get a new blazer, get my hair cut, and find a brown candle. So, like, very, very honorable mentions. Yeah, that's the what it's like to be in my brain.
Well, this is a small teaser of what day in every day for us is, because this is a frequent conversation we have where it's like, I saw this cool thing. Did you think about this? Or how can we apply this to something new? And I think this is an interesting format.
Yeah, yeah. If you guys liked this, let us know. We are very curious to know what your thoughts were. And you can send us your thoughts on Instagram, and our DMs at Joe in London is the best place to reach out. So let us know what you thought about this format, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye.